Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with another in our series of Dave's Faves. And today I'm talking about a real collector's item that I stumbled across and fell in love with, and then it turned out to be very important to me for various reasons. It is this. Edouard Batiste, who was a French organist and composer in the 19th century. He died in 1876. He was born in 1820, and this is a selection of his organ works performed by Diego Innocenzi, who is a wonderful Swiss organist, and he's playing on the Merklin and Schütze organ of 1857 at the Iglesia Catedral de Santa Maria in Murcia, Spain, one of the last remaining intact exemplars of this kind of organ. Anyway, Batiste is important to me because he took all of the slow movements of Beethoven's symphonies, plus a few other bits besides, like chunks of the Ninth and the Fifth, and turned them into French liturgical organ music. Now, I'm not exactly into organ music, and I'm really not into liturgical organ music, but I kind of like French organ music because it's French, and French things are kind of cool, but also because it's a fascinating example of how to deal with performance practice. Now, some of you may know that I did a talk. I mean, there's a video here on, yes, Beethoven's orchestra played with vibrato. And one of the ways we know that is because composers who tried to imitate string textures on the organ invariably registered the organ so that it included these special organ stops that play with vibrato. There are two different kinds. There's a tremulant, which is a whirring thing that interrupts the airflow and makes the sound wobble. And there's also something called celeste tuning, which is invented by Aristide Cavaillé-Coll in the 1820s and 30s. And that means mistuning two ranks of pipes so that they create acoustic beats when they're played together. A very tiny bit of alternation, which makes the sound sort of wah, 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 like that. It's not the same thing as string vibrato. It's a mechanical application, whereas string vibrato in real life is infinitely variable, depending on how the players respond to the musical phrase. But the concept is the same, and the necessity of having it when you're trying to imitate an orchestral texture, and particularly a body of strings, is extremely significant, as evidence of what players were doing back in the days before we had recordings. And Batiste not only registers it that way, but he writes notes in his scores saying, yes, you have to use this stop and that stop to imitate the sound of the cello or the sound of the violins. It's very interesting. But even more interesting is how he chops up, because these are all edited versions of the slow movements of the Beethoven symphonies in order to create short liturgical works called communion, elevation, to fit with the musical necessities of the French Mass of the day. And, I thought, okay, it's like, why do I care about organ music? Well, this is one reason. And I took all this information that I got and presented it actually in a paper, which is going to be published in a book, a collection of essays from a symposium called Beethoven the European, a symposium that was held in Italy. And really, it's just been a wonderful voyage of discovery. I'm trying to figure out what these people were doing back then and learning about their musical taste. One of the ways that Beethoven became Beethoven, with a capital B, that was how the word got out about his music in the days before broadcasting and before recordings, and when only a tiny number of people could go see concerts, and when only a tiny number of concerts were given in any given season. Because remember, in those days, the season I mean, for example, the Paris Conservatory Orchestra, which was the major orchestra in Paris, was only a handful of concerts, a dozen concerts or so. And they were only given, in the winter, usually, because that was when, the annual outbreak of cholera had subsided and the plague was rather less, and all the rich people came back from their houses in the country. And poorer people, normal people, average people had no opportunity to see a lot of this stuff at all. So where would they encounter Beethoven? How would Beethoven become the cultural icon that he became today? This is one of the reasons. It was like advertising. Most of the French liturgical music of the day consisted of opera highlights, famous tunes from the big operas, from Donizetti and Bellini and Meyerbeer. And they turned this stuff into church music. And rather than oppose this, most French priests were all in favor because it brought people into church on the weekends to hear the organ music, to hear the recital and the big tunes. I mean, the culture was quite different than it is today, and people's access to what we consider to be high art was moderated by these very, very, very different arrangements and ways of hearing the music. And Beethoven, of course, was never known much as a tunesmith. One of the reasons that Batiste did these arrangements or made them is because, like many people of the day, he was horrified by the fact that all of this trashy secular music, especially operatic music about infidelity and, all sorts of naughty activity and sex, was being used as French liturgical music. He wanted to elevate the standard of French liturgical music, so he did it by arranging Beethoven, because Batiste was a creature of the Paris Conservatory. He was teaching there like at the age of 9 or something. I don't know. He was an incredible prodigy. And the fact of the matter is that the Paris Conservatory Orchestra was founded in 1828 by the conductor Francois Habeneck, simply for the purpose of playing Beethoven. Beethoven was worshipped in French orchestral circles and at the Paris Conservatory. And the tradition of playing Beethoven goes back to Beethoven's own day, his life. The very first concert of the Paris Conservatory Orchestra featured the Eroica Symphony. And so Batiste really was had an incredible pedigree in Beethoven performance. And these works had not been recorded before this came out, before Mr. Innocenzi got his hands on them. They'd been out of print for many, many years. They were published in the 19th century. Batiste's own music, his other music, is as good as, vanished. I mean, there's like one piece that gets played in church circles. It's called something like the Hymn of Faith or something. It's really tacky. And he also was famous for writing, as all French organists had to, something called an orage, a storm. I mean, you had to have a storm with every mass. You had to have your storm for some reason. Had very little to do with the service, but it was a piece of music that began with sort of a pastoral interlude, and then, you'd take the whole organ and stomp on it and do a thunderstorm with pedal effects. And actually, organs in those days were built with an orage stop, which you could pull out, which basically just made the whole organ, including the sub-bass pedals, just go rah, like this. And there is an orage on this recording, which is appropriately terrifying. So this is on the, let's see, what's the label here? Aeolus, Aeolus, the Aeolus label. And it's Diego Innocenzi. There he is. You can see that. And the composer is Edouard Batiste. And you will find on this disc, which contains this set, which contains two discs, all of his Beethoven arrangements. He also arranged Handel and some other people, and something from Hamlet, or Omelette, as we call him, by Ambroise Thomas. And it's just all kinds of, and other church music written for various purposes. French liturgical organ music. It's really quite a find, I think. And this is one of my essential little collector's items now. I just adore it. It's wonderfully played, fabulously recorded, and fascinating. So keep on listening, friends. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care.